Welcome to the Expert Talks by Kalkine TV. Today's guest is Mr. Godspower Eseurhobo, who is the founder and the remote work leader at AfriSplash remotely. And I'm Sage. So I'll tell you a little bit about AfriSplash. AfriSplash harnesses the power of community and team spirit to empower young African talent from every part of the continent. And they uphold a diverse, inclusive and healthy environment for talent to thrive from various ethnicities and career backgrounds to draw from for the creation of innovative startups. So stay watching to find out more. Bringing you live today, we have Mr. Godspower Eseurhobo, the remote work leader and founder at AfriSplash remotely. Welcome to the show, Godspower.
Thank you so much.
We really do appreciate you joining us today to help us understand a little bit about the significance of the work that you do. So remote work has escalated. We've kind of evolved into hybrid workspaces for many during the pandemic. As you are working to connect the African talent with the global businesses, what are the primary criteria you employ to build optimum connections for both the job seekers and companies, please?
That's a great question. So first off, I think when we look to connect talent to companies and startups and of course Fortune 500s, what I look at is basically building communities, basically understanding how people connect, which we need to understand that virtually it's common for people to actually be able to connect without having physical meetings. And in the modern day, I think virtual communication is everything. So that means we are looking at communities, and of course, we are looking at building trust between these communities. And I'm looking at founders who believe in people and talents who take ownership for the job to be done. So that's it. That's what I look to actually find in people if I make that connection.
Yes, that sounds fantastic. I mean, without the people power, business that's experiencing growth can see some complications, I suppose. So, Godspower, you've been working on the remote work side of things for quite some time now. In your opinion, which job requirements are mostly high for remote work and which have faced significant issues while working remotely? Would you consider yourself a work nomad or a nomad because you work remotely?
Not really. I think there's a slight difference between a remote worker and a digital nomad. So I'd say a digital nomad is like a free bird. Basically, they are, not bound by location. It means they are location independent, but they still have a major impact on the business world. And normally, when we are looking at this, we're looking at connecting with various people all over the globe, building solutions with them. And I think that's important. And to have these skills, it means you need core skills. You need to be able to think for a living, which, it's very important in the gig economy. Normally now people have to think about solutions. People need to actually walk through analytics and be able to say, this is the routes we want to take. And it doesn't actually determine if you are in an office to actually decide, right? And so I believe to a huge extent, remote work has no barrier. So for digital nomads, they are free. For remote workers, you need skills like analytics. You need to be a critical thinker. That's why you have a lot of product managers working remotely. And also you need technical skills. The demand for engineers are basically on all-time high. And I think everyone out there basically working remotely, especially in the tech ecosystem, can actually, work productively without having, barriers to face. And because remote work means, location independence, it means there are no barriers to remote work. The sky is the limit. That's it.
That's amazing to hear. Thank you so much. It's very encouraging. And I've also heard some fantastic stories about the top robotics engineers coming out of African countries. And surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, some of them are very young women, which is great news because sometimes the tech sector, engineering can be very male focused, but it's fantastic news to hear that there's greater diversity coming into the sector. And I believe that your work plays a large part or has major significance to do with this. So you've created an amazing talent pool of African techs and creatives. How does it help to enhance diversity in the global industry? Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Definitely, when we're looking at the global stage, I think we have more new ideas. When we, break that barrier of saying we want people 30 miles within the office, Now, innovation, it means you have people from different parts of the world thinking differently, bringing up different solutions to solve, recurring problems. It means there's diversity in the thought process. And diversity is not just about the face, it's about the people actually working, sharing things in common, and of course, having value for each and every culture in that room. Also, I think one key part of, diversity is also leveling the playing field for all talents. I believe previously we say Silicon Valley was, high tech community. We had a lot of technical people coming in from there. But now with remote work, we have, people from emerging economies earning, the Silicon Valley wage. And of course, that leads to economic growth because that money goes back into communities, develops communities, and they're building solutions on the global stage. And finally, I think diversity is something that's a strategy. Now let's look at the time difference now between remote workers, between distributed teams. And now it means they don't just work 9 to 5 because of that time difference. They overlap and basically they get to do more. It means more productivity for the team. And of course, that's rapid growth for the company.
That's a very interesting concept. So, how do you measure the quality of work and the amount of work that these engineers and technicians are doing? Because if they're making their own hours, can you talk us through about that from a management perspective or the operations perspective? Is there KPIs involved with this type of work?
Basically, I think the future of work is all about trust. Now, when you trust people, you let them do what they love the way they want to do it. And I believe that we're not hiring kids, right? So before you actually hire someone, make sure you can build mutual trust. And then we look at output rather than what we're actually doing by the hour. So instead of saying, I spent 4 hours working or, taking my, time sheets or something like that, we're looking at I was able to achieve 4 tasks under 4 hours. We're looking at I was able to achieve the overall goal, and this is what I'm presenting to you. I've been working for this, on this for 4 months, and it's not about how many hours I spent doing it, but how I actually worked towards the outcome. So we should be focused more on outcomes rather than inputs, and because that's a great way to avoid burnout, and it's a great way to actually make sure people are owning up for their responsibilities and actually doing it.
Great, thank you so much. Yes, I have much more clarity on the topic now. And Godspower, working for like a software company such as IBM or a computer company like Microsoft, Adobe, these companies are some of the best places in the world to work in regards to conditions and benefits. What do you think, what type of qualities does it take for a person to become a remote worker who doesn't mind working in startups and coming up with solutions for where there may not be any infrastructure yet? What do you think the type of qualities that you look for will allow a person to thrive in this type of work?
Definitely, my go-to is always continuous learning. Now, I might be able to hire someone who has 3 years of experience and he works, for 6 years and he still has that same experience in terms of know-how, technical know-how. But the what I look for in continuous learners is basically I might be able to hire someone now in a month's time and he has learned new things. He has improved in terms of execution, delivering. And I believe continuous learning is basically lifetime stuff and people who continue to learn would always improve and outplay all those who are maybe in big tech and are not actually learning and innovating. Basically, we need to learn, unlearn, and relearn. So that's why I look for that specifically in every talent.
Right, so you think being a remote worker can offer challenges that maybe working in big tech won't, and that way people can self-develop and grow and expand their thought. That's great. So do you think this type of remote work will still be on the rise as we emerge out of the pandemic in due time?
Definitely, a lot of big tech companies are actually moving, to remote work. We're looking at Spotify, we're looking at PwC, we're looking at a lot of them actually leveraging, the contingent workforce. So currently, at my role at MBOpartners, which is basically the world's leading platform for independent contractors. What people do is basically connect ICs to Fortune 500s. That's proof enough that these companies understand the power of, the contingent workforce. So in the future, the demand for remote work would actually spike, would actually go up because people are looking for diversity. People are looking for freedom and flexibility. People are looking for quality time with their families. And the notion of saying you have to give up, private life, you have to miss, a child growing up to basically have a career is dead and gone. So the present of work, not really the future of work, is people being valued for who they are, people being appreciated at home, still getting work done, and we don't need to sacrifice one for the other.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing your valuable insights today. We are starting to wind up the discussion. So lastly, can you share your insights on the best practices of remote work? How can you make the most of this type of work, please?
Definitely. When remote work gives you freedom, I think it's up to you to actually take ownership of the tasks you need to deliver on and make sure you actually deliver that. And also, we're looking at burnout. Burnout is basically real. So I want people to look into prioritizing, the mental well-being. It's super important because once you are able to manage your own time, there is that chance of you overloading yourself, trying to get 2 weeks work done in a week. And that's super wrong. So we should always watch out for that in terms of remote working. And finally, I'm looking at for the startup or the large enterprise, set up tools that would actually make remote work, because you can't try to replicate the office when it's remote. So basically, we should bring up systems, give employees tools that would actually help them get work done effectively. And finally, one key thing about remote work is using it as a strategy for diversity. And basically, when you hire from anywhere, it means you have access to the global pool of talent of the world. That means you have the best talents from Europe, you have the best talents from Africa, you have the best talents from Asia, you have the best talents from Latin America. And that's a bonus for you because you have different minds coming together to build teams on the global stage. And definitely it's proven that global companies actually do better because they have these additions, these ideations from people who have different thought processes, and it always brings in positive results.
That's great to hear. It sounds like a very positive industry to be working in. And Godspower, it's a new paradigm for management, engaging remote teams. Any tips on that before we go?
Engaging remote teams, I think try as much as possible to go async. That's important. It means you shouldn't spend much time on Zoom calls. That's Zoom fatigue. People get tired of listening to the same thing over and over again, and that stress comes in. So as much as possible, communicate asynchronously. It means basically having conversations on the go. You don't need to reply, on instant. Use audios, use, written documentations. They will help people take off their face from the screens and basically focus on getting the real work done. Because that's one of the most important things, because people can actually have meetings upon meetings upon meetings, and you don't actually do the right work. So go async as much as possible. And as a manager, trust your team, mutual trust. Let them actually earn that trust and believe in the team to actually deliver. That's it.
That sounds great. So quality and not quantity was probably the basis of that. Great news. Thank you so much for your time today. We do appreciate your insights, Godspower. And if you've just joined us, we had a very interesting discussion. Mr. Godspower Eseurhobo, remote work leader and founder of AfriSplash Remotely. For the full discussion, head to the YouTube channel Kalkine Media. Keep watching for more of the live expert talks and market updates. And as we say, stay apprised and invest wise with Kalkine.